Hi, it's Malusim Kiza, and today we're going to be looking at executors' fees and how they can be catered for in a client's financial plan. So one of the first things to remember about executors' fees is that it's exactly that. It's just a fee. It's a fee that is paid to or charged by an administrator when somebody's passed on and they have to wind up the estate. Somebody has to be calling all the assets and looking at all the liabilities and ultimately dispersing whatever is left to the heirs. So somebody has to administratively do that. So it's a fee that is charged by that. The only time that the government is involved in that is that they set a maximum of what that fee is in terms of the tariff that they can be charged. So for example, the tariff that is set is at 3.5% without VAT. So that's the first thing we've got to just clear around in our heads, that it's actually a fee, as opposed to something like estate duty or income tax or dividends tax or capital gains tax. Those are taxes levied in terms of whatever the relevant legislation is, and that is administered by the government. So they levy tax in terms of that, whatever the relevant tax is. For example, estate duty. And if you haven't seen the video on estate duty, have a look at that just to get a sense of what it's about. And whereas what is opposed to executors' fees is purely somebody just charging a fee for actually administering the winding up of the estate. So that's the first thing we just need to clear up. And now we're going to go to an example just to illustrate how executors' fees actually works in practice. So in my example, let's assume that we've got a husband and wife and they're married. Let's say, should we make them married antenuptial contract, and yeah, without the accrual system. So let's further assume that the husband owned a house which is worth 5 million rands, so it's all in his name, and he also had a citrus farm which was worth 15 million rands. Now let's just say in terms of his will, it states that I leave my farm to my 2 sons and I leave my house to my wife. And just to spice it up just a little bit, let's assume that son 1 actually is in South Africa and works in the farm, is a general manager in the farm. He knows the farm work and all of that. He works together with his dad. However, son 2 has relocated to the UK and actually a lawyer in the UK. And this is actually based, or my story is actually inspired by a real life case. So we'll call son 1 the local, and we'll call son 2, we're just going to label it as he is offshore. So now that the father has passed away and we know what his wishes are in terms of the will, now somebody's actually going to carry these things out and actually allocate in terms of the will. And in comes the executor. So in terms of the will, the executor is going to transfer the house to the wife, and he's also going to transfer the farm to the 2 sons. Now at this point, you'll notice I haven't mentioned any debts that the husband had or any liabilities or anything like that. I'm just purely talking about his assets, and that's because executors' fees are calculated on the gross assets of the deceased. Forget about the whole issue about deductions and debts, and all of these things come in when you're working out estate duty. So by the estate duty act, you'll see that the tariff is 3.5% on gross value of assets. And the important thing there to remember is that that is excluding VAT. The minute you add VAT in, it becomes 4.025%. And if there's an income, it's at 6% on accrued and collected income. For our purposes, we're not going to consider income. We're just going to look at the gross value of assets. So perhaps it's quite important to pause here just a second Just remember, we're not talking about estate duty now. In estate duty, we could sometimes get confused with the terminology. We talk about gross value of the estate. Now, what that is made up of is the assets plus deemed property. So that's things like your insurance policies that are paying into the estate. So that becomes deemed property. On the other hand, what we're looking at here is just the value, the gross value of the assets. So just purely the assets. We're not adding any deemed property here. We're just looking at the house, for example, and the farm. So in terms of our executor's fee calculation, we have a property, which is the house, with 5 million rands, and we're going to add the farm, which is also worth 15 million rands, and it gives us a total of 20 million rands. Now, this 20 million rands upon where we're going to where the executor is going to levy an executor's fee, and because we're assuming that our executor is VAT registered, if you take 3.5% and increase it by 15% for VAT, you're going to get a total of 4.025% as an executor's fee that is going to be levied on this 20 million rands. And that gives you a figure of R805,000. So that is the executor's fee in terms of this will. I think it's important to stress at this point that although in my example the couple were married in anti-natural contract without the accrual system, that the issue of executor's fees wouldn't differ if they were married in community or property. That is because if you look at the house, it's worth 5 million rands. When it comes to transferring that house from the husband estate to the wife, he's not going to transfer half of it. He's going to have to deal with the whole house as a whole. So therefore, he's going to charge executor's fees on the whole house, regardless of the fact that he was married in community or property. So we don't divide that figure by 2. Now, the 805,000 rand executor's fees that we've calculated, it's going to have to come from the estate. So it's either the father has made some provision for it, otherwise some assets are going to be sold in order to provide for that payment of estate duty. Now, one of the simple ways you can provide for executor's fees is to simply write a life policy where executor's fees, where the funds pay into the estate and take care of the executor's fees. And today there's actually a couple of specific products that look at how they're going to maintain or pay for executor's fees, including other fees that I'll talk about just now. So once the executor has wound up the estate and everything is finalized, then only is he entitled to that 805,000 rand fee. So until all that work is done, he's not entitled to that fee. However, that is a fee. That is what he's entitled to because he's just wound up the estate. Now comes something completely different. And again, we've been focusing on executor's fees, but I'm just going to show you quickly how now the executor's fees adds in or is relevant when you're calculating estate duty. Because remember what we said there in estate duty, we are calculating the deceased estate, the net estate. So if things like, for example, executor's fees, which have been a burden to the estate because of the winding up, then those have to come off, because in terms of estate duty, we're trying to calculate the net value of the estate. So now when we're working out the estate duty, we know that he has property of 20 million, and the 20 million is made up of the 5 million rands house and the 15 million rands farm. So that's his property that he has. And then we're going to add deemed property. Now in our example, we haven't used any example of deemed property. Deemed property, typical example being a policy, which I touched on the estate duty video. But this is a whole topic on its own. So I think I'll cover it separately. But for now, we're just going to focus on just the general working of estate duty. So they'll give you your gross estate, which is in our example will stay 20 million. And then we have to deduct this 805,000 rands that we've just worked out as the executor's fees. Now that comes off because remember, ultimately we're trying to when we're working out estate duty, we're trying to tax the net estate. So we need to take out anything like, for example, here deductions, and the example we used here as a deduction is the executor's fees. So that's going to come off. and then that gives you a net value of 19,195,000 as your net estate. And then we've got the Section 4A abatement, which is minus 3.5 million rands, which is available to everyone. That's giving you a dutiable estate of 15,695,000. And if you look at the estate duty calculation or the estate duty tax on that, we're working with a value that's less than 30 million rands. Therefore, 20% of the 15,695,000 gives you 3,139,000 rands. So that's his net estate duty. So that's his estate duty that's due and payable. So at the end of the day, for this estate, in terms of liabilities, that's the estate duty liability, and that 805,000 is the executor fees. So in total, in terms of this estate, you're looking at 805,000 rands, plus, which is the executor fees, and an additional 3,139,000 rands. That's going to be estate duty. So in a nutshell, when you work out executors fees, the executors fees are just a fee to wind up the deceased estate, and because we still need to tax estate duty, we need to minus that executors fees because it's an expense within the estate. So we need to take it off the gross estate before we get to a net value of the estate, before we can tax estate duty. So these are two completely different costs to the estate, the one driven by Estate Duty Act and the one just simply an executor fee, which is managed by law in terms of the maximum tariff that you can apply as an executor fee. I think just as a tip, I mean, we've got, there's many fees and duties and all of these things to work out, and we're just touching on some of them in a very high level. But I think one of the most important things is, besides just working out what the fees are in order to determine how to manage those costs, the other thing is, you'll remember that in my case, I said the one son is living here locally and he works in the farm, while the other one is actually offshore, living in the UK, working as a lawyer there. This is actually based on a real case. Now, what we could have done in this estate, well, what did happen in this particular example, is that while it's all well and good to say I leave the farm to my two sons, but in my example, the sons didn't get along, and the one was offshore and the other one was local. What could have been possibly a solution, instead of just capturing what the estate duty liability could possibly be, which you can manage, but we could have actually maybe did some different planning here, where we said, since the son is in the business within the farm, he could perhaps buy the business from his father. That's going into a buy and sell agreement, which is a topic for another day. Or perhaps even say, if I leave the business to my son in terms of a will, then perhaps I could look at taking out another policy for my son that's going to pay offshore. And number one, it's going to be safe from the estate duty net, because any policy that's payable offshore doesn't come into the estate duty net. So there's other options that we could have looked at in order to make sure that this estate gets divided quite simply. In any event, what ended up happening in this case is, because it's a farm. Now, because the brothers didn't get along, they wanted to subdivide the farm, but unfortunately you need ministerial consent in order to do that, because what the government is trying to do is basically to save agricultural land so that we don't, subdivide everything and we build malls and whatever the case may be. We still need to eat. So they couldn't subdivide this land, and it just created more problems, which meant that the executor had to go back and there were court cases, and all of those things actually accumulate as extra costs within the estate over and above just the normal executor's fee that we're talking about. So we've got to be mindful of, while we're calculating these things for the client, but if you have a conversation with your client, then maybe you could structure things differently and maybe propose some other things that we have in terms of products that we can solve some of the solutions that our clients face. So otherwise, that's it for me for today. That was just a quick snapshot of what executors fees are. Like I said, it's a quick snapshot. There's so many other fees that we haven't even spoken about, whether it be transfer costs or conveyancer fees, which many products out in the market actually manage as well. So this is just a quick snapshot of what executors fees purely are, so that we can be aware of them. And if you look at the workings out of what they could actually amount to be, it's quite a hefty amount. So we've got to be really mindful when we're doing financial planning for our clients. So please don't forget to subscribe. Any comments, any topics that we want to be discussed, when you want to discuss, and yes, I'll be seeing you shortly. Thank you.